Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world that flickers with candlelight, smells faintly of old stone and beeswax, and moves at the pace of handwritten prayers and bells that never quite let you rest. You're about to enter the quiet, chilly halls of a medieval monastery, where time is measured not by clocks but by dripping wax and faith-fueled yawns. It's the story of how monks, long before the snooze button, invented something oddly close to the first alarm clock. And yes, it involved fire. You probably wouldn't survive this kind of sleep schedule. Just saying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts before dawn. Of course it does. The stars are still bright overhead, breath clouds in the air, and the floor is just cold enough to make you question all your life choices, even the ones that led you to wear these itchy woolen robes. You're a novice, recently admitted to the monastery, and your job right now is to rise. That's it. Just get up. No matter that it's still pitch dark and your dreams haven't finished playing out. The bell for matins will sound soon, and you'd better not be the last one there. The dormitory, is lined with low beds, each one with a coarse blanket and a little shelf. No doors. No privacy. Someone's already up. You can hear them creaking on the old floorboards, trying not to sneeze in the chill. The candles haven't been lit yet, but you can just make out the faint outlines of sleepy figures shuffling into their sandals and murmuring short prayers that are, frankly, more yawn than devotion. One of the monks, an older one with the patience of someone who's seen centuries of bleary-eyed novices before you, moves through the room with a stub of wax, lighting one candle after another. The glow grows slowly, inch by inch, until it chases the shadows back into the stone corners. This is how mornings begin here. Not with coffee, not with email, not even with birdsong. Just wax, cold feet, and the promise of a long day broken into small, sacred tasks. The monks are quiet. Mostly. Occasionally, someone whispers a psalm or coughs discreetly into their sleeve. You're not supposed to talk much, especially not during the night hours. The rule of Saint Benedict encourages silence. And in the stillness, the smallest sounds seem exaggerated. The scratch of wool. The hiss of a candle. The click of wood against stone. And of course, the bell. It doesn't ring so much as echo, low and sleepy, like even it wishes it could hit snooze. It tolls just once, signaling that you all have to rise now, even if your soul hasn't quite caught up with your body. You line up with the others, robes swishing softly, and begin your procession to the chapel. The halls are barely warmer than the dormitory, and your breath clouds in front of your face as you walk. It's at this hour, before dawn, before noise, before color, that you start to appreciate why monks even needed an alarm system in the first place. With no clocks, no light, and no sense of time beyond gut instinct and prayer, someone had to keep things running. That someone was the night bell ringer. A noble post, and often thankless. The bell ringer had to wake on their own, before the others, and ensure that matins didn't happen 15 minutes too late or half an hour too early. In some monasteries, they were allowed to use primitive timekeeping methods, not sundials, of course, far too dark, but sand glasses or even water clocks if they were lucky. But in poorer abbeys, or more inventive ones, someone eventually figured out that wax melts at a fairly predictable rate. Enter the candle clock. You wouldn't know it yet, but that stub of candle the elder monk lit earlier? It's not just for illumination. It's time itself. In these early days, monks would mark the side of a tall candle with little notches, each one measuring a set interval, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30. As the candle burned down and the wax reached a line, the monk knew how much time had passed. If they were really clever, they'd affix a small pin into the side. When the wax softened enough, the pin would fall out, hopefully landing on a metal plate or bowl with a distinct plink, just loud enough to nudge the bell ringer awake. Historians still argue whether this method was genuinely reliable or more of a desperate workaround. But what's certain is that it worked often enough to become widespread. It was simple, quiet, and required nothing but wax, a few metal pins, and a healthy respect for open flame near one's bed. Quirky tidbit? Some monks got creative and tried to scent their candles. Lavender to soothe the nerves. Rosemary to help wake up. One particularly eccentric brother reportedly infused his with mint oil, which, unfortunately, made the dormitory smell like a melted candy shop for weeks. And so your days begin, in flickering light, on a stone floor ruled by wax. You shuffle into the chapel. The candlelight here is brighter, reflected off polished brass fixtures. The chants begin, low and slow, meant less for performance and more for rhythm, a way to wrap the cold air in something warm. You join in, even if your voice cracks a little. Everyone's voice cracks a little. The hours stretch ahead of you: chores, meals, study, prayers, more prayers, and a few stolen moments of sleep. But that first candle, with its melting minutes and soft light, remains in your memory. A flickering flame that measured devotion more than time. You blink slowly as the chants roll over you, not so much singing as synchronized breathing with syllables. The Latin words are familiar by now, but your tongue still trips occasionally, and you quietly pray that your voice doesn't stand out. In the dimness of the chapel, the candle clocks stand at attention, fat pillars of wax with tidy notches cut in their sides, each mark a silent promise of time passing, one drip at a time. This is the monastic way. Order through flame. The entire schedule of the day, the divine office, is punctuated not by hours as we know them, but by sacred divisions: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. It's a holy rhythm, and every monk learns to move by it, like boats bobbing to the tide. But here's the thing: in winter, the nights are long and cruel, and time feels slippery. The bells need to ring at specific intervals. But how do you know when prime ends and terce begins when the sun hasn't moved an inch and the shadows all look the same? That's where the candle clocks, those humble fire sticks of ingenuity, earn their keep. Not just one per room. Not even one per monk. No, this was a system. In some abbeys, a whole table of candles would be set up, each labeled for a different prayer hour, each lit in succession or, occasionally, simultaneously, for cross-checking. It's less tick-tock and more drip-drip. The wax curls inward as it melts. You notice it. You always notice it. Living in a monastery means you have the sort of focus that could spot a drooping candle from 50 paces. Not out of fear, though fire hazards are very real when your robes are basically flammable curtains, but out of necessity. The candle is the clock. You learn to feel it. Smell it. Read it like it's a living creature. And sometimes, the candles lie. Yes, the idealized burn time of a candle is neat and mathematically satisfying on parchment, but in practice, wax has opinions. Beeswax from summer hives burns faster than winter wax. A draft in the corridor? That'll throw your entire schedule off by 6 to 7 minutes. A candle made by Brother Thomas during his experimental phase involving goose fat? Let's just say it didn't so much burn as sob its way down to a puddle. Historians still argue whether medieval candle clocks were an act of genius or a last resort, one step above guesswork but three below actual reliability. But the monks used them anyway, not because they were perfect, but because they were consistent in spirit. And let's be honest, when your schedule is built around prayer, not punctuality, being close is often close enough. Now imagine you're assigned to be the timekeeper this week, a role both sacred and slightly dreaded. It's your job to monitor the candles and ring the bells. And yes, if the pin doesn't drop properly, or if the wax melts unevenly, or if someone accidentally swaps the sext candle with the vespers one, that's on you. You could throw the whole abbey offbeat. It's like being a DJ, but instead of spinning vinyl, you're lighting wax and hoping for divine timing. You take your position in the scriptorium. It's not just for copying manuscripts, it's also where the timekeeping candles are kept, away from drafts and direct sun. The table is neat, as all things here are. 5 candles are lined up before you, each with hand-carved marks and delicate iron pins at precise intervals. There's a sandglass too, just in case things go sideways. Some monks swear by it. Others say sand is for beaches and pagans. You don't argue. The air is thick with wax and ink. A nearby monk sharpens a quill against a pumice stone, sending tiny flakes drifting onto the flagstones. Another hums something suspiciously tuneful, and you wonder if he's sneaking a secular melody into the cloister, again. The rules frown on that. Joy, after all, must be devotional. Outside the small window, the wind moans. It's not quite dawn yet, but a hint of gray pushes against the horizon. You sip from a pewter cup of weak ale. Monks don't drink water unless they absolutely must, and even then, they eye it like it might talk back, and you watch your first candle begin to lean slightly as it burns. And then, the pin drops. Clink. It hits the tin dish below, a sound soft enough to miss unless you've trained your ears to catch it, which you have. The bell must be rung. You step into the corridor, reach for the rope, and give it a firm tug. The bell answers. Its voice is deep and old, a sound that wakes not just the other monks but something in you too. A strange kind of purpose. Time has passed. It's marked now. You've done your part. You return to your post and check the next candle. The wax has slouched over slightly, but the pin remains upright, defiant. You nudge it with a quill to see if it's ready. Not quite. Patience is a virtue, and in the monastery, it's also a survival skill. Quirky tidbit time? In some abbeys, when candle clocks proved unreliable, the monks employed trained roosters. Yes, really. A sort of early organic alarm system. The rooster would be kept in a specially designed box that opened at a certain hour, triggered by a slowly turning gear linked to a burning cord. The rooster, understandably confused and furious, would then crow. Sometimes. Unless it decided it didn't feel like it. You lean back and close your eyes for just a moment, listening to the rustle of wool robes, the occasional cough, and the gentle drip of wax on tin. It's not the world outside. It's not supposed to be. It's quieter here. Stranger. Lit entirely by flame and faith. And maybe that's what makes it so easy to lose track of time, because in a monastery, time isn't owned. It's borrowed, one candle at a time. The smell of wax lingers in your sleeves, and you're pretty sure your fingers are permanently scented like beeswax and brass polish. That's just part of the timekeeper's burden. Or privilege, depending on how you spin it. You sit again, watching the slow slump of the next candle. Its flame dances a little. There's a tiny draft coming from beneath the door, possibly from Brother Anselm's snoring down the hall, which could power a small mill. The candle's pin is halfway melted down to its tipping point. You have a few minutes, maybe more. Enough time to think about how all this started. Monks weren't always candle connoisseurs, of course. The earliest monasteries functioned on sun and shadow, like everyone else. They watched the way light pooled in doorways, how it touched the tops of cloisters, how long it took a shadow to crawl across a table. You learn to tell time the same way you learn to pray, by repetition and hope. But shadow time, as you might imagine, has some issues. Clouds. Rain. The inconvenient fact that winter mornings sometimes don't arrive until you've already eaten breakfast and questioned your life choices. So by the 9th century, some clever monks began experimenting with alternate methods. Sundials were useful but only outdoors. Water clocks were finicky. And then someone, no one knows who, looked at a burning candle and thought, what if we made it anxious about deadlines? That's when the idea of marking candles began. Melt rate, after all, is sort of predictable. You make your candle the same thickness, same wax blend, same wick. Then you notch it every inch or so, and boom, a visual countdown. Still wildly imprecise by today's standards, but leagues ahead of eyeball the moon and guess. Historians still argue whether candle clocks originated in isolated monastic pockets or were adapted from earlier timekeeping methods in Persia or China. There are ancient Chinese texts that describe incense clocks and time rods that release aroma in stages, like a scented schedule. One theory holds that medieval monks may have heard tales from traders or travelers and simply reinvented the concept with what they had on hand: wax, faith, and an unshakable desire for punctual prayers. You lean over and inspect the base of the candle again. The pin wiggles slightly. Only a few minutes left. You could recenter it, slow it down a hair. But that's technically cheating, and besides, Brother Cuthbert might be watching from behind the bookshelf. He's always lurking when you're on candle duty. Last time you so much as scratched your nose near the flame, he cleared his throat in a way that somehow implied eternal damnation. In truth, you understand his devotion. For Cuthbert, time is sacred geometry. Everything in its right place. He once redrew the Abbey's entire bell's schedule because he felt the acoustics favored the east wing unfairly. And don't even get him started on unequal hours. Those shifting length hours used in summer and winter that make modern people weep with confusion. Still, not every abbey had a Cuthbert. Many relied on simple methods. In some places, monks would estimate the passing of hours by how many psalms they could sing. If you can finish Psalm 119, you've definitely overrun terce, they'd say. Not a joke. Psalm 119 is the longest. Try staying awake through all 176 verses and not questioning your life's direction. Back in your little timekeeping nook, the pin finally surrenders. It slips from its wax cradle and tinks against the tin tray like a polite drumbeat. Clink. You rise, stretch, your knees crack in that way that monks never admit to, and walk once more toward the bell rope. You give it 2 solid tugs this time. A different sound from before, more urgent. It's time for sext, the midday prayer. Though midday is a generous term, it's not noon yet, but again, time in a monastery is more of a theme than a number. The bell echoes through the halls, and you know monks are shifting from scriptoriums, herb gardens, kitchens, and crypts. Everyone moves in response to sound here. Words are valuable, but bells are law. You make your way back to the candle table. There's already a fresh stub prepared, wick trimmed, pin inserted neatly at the half mark. You light it from the stump of the old one, because candles, like monks, are expected to pass the flame along. While it burns, you take a moment to sketch something in the margins of a wax-stained ledger. A quick doodle. Maybe a mouse peeking out of a candlestick. It won't survive Brother Cuthbert's next inspection, but it amuses you. Monastic life is full of rules, but within those rules, there's still room for tiny rebellions. Quirky tidbit time. In at least one abbey in 12th century France, the monks tried using cheese as a time indicator. Yes, cheese. Supposedly, it was a firm cheese that softened gradually at room temperature. A small pebble was placed on top, and when it sank halfway in, you rang the bell. Did it work? Probably not. But someone cared enough to write it down, which says a lot about human optimism. You shift your weight, listening as the candle begins to hiss ever so slightly, a sign it's burning cleanly. If the flame dances too much, you'll have to trim the wick. Too high, and it'll soot the stone ceiling. Too low, and it'll drown in its own puddle. Candle maintenance is, you realize, an art form. There are monks who genuinely pride themselves on even burns and symmetrical drips. Outside the window, the light has shifted again. More gold now. The kind of light that lands gently, like a blessing. You look across the stone yard and see Brother Evo chasing a goose. Again. Some things never change. You smile faintly and glance back at the candles. The next pin is an hour away. Enough time to do nothing. Which, in this life, is rarely a wasted hour. There's a rhythm to the day now, like a drumbeat that only monks can hear. You follow it without thinking, like a duckling on a well-worn path, though considerably less fluffy. The bell has rung for sext, and across the abbey, sandals are slapping stone, robes are swishing, and someone is probably mumbling about the lack of decent soup options again. You don't head to prayer right away. You have time. Candlekeepers are granted a curious sort of leeway, blessed, perhaps, by their role in guiding the hours. It's not power, exactly, but it's something close to reverence. If a monk tells time, everyone listens. Even if he's mostly guessing. You use this precious gap to wander through the west cloister, your footsteps echoing softly under the vaulted ceiling. Arched windows spill sunlight in crooked rectangles. The air is warm today, and it carries the faint smell of chamomile from the herb garden, where Brother Godfrey is almost certainly weeding with unnecessary enthusiasm. That man could intimidate a dandelion into repentance, You pass the library, a low, vaulted chamber filled with the scent of old leather, dust, and ambition. Inside, two scribes are hunched over manuscripts, their goose feather quills moving with slow, deliberate grace. One is copying Augustine's Confessions, and the other is painstakingly illuminating the letter Q for the 7th time this week. You nod politely. They don't look up. Time here is thick, like honey. Everything takes longer, but no one minds. Probably because no one has anywhere else to be. Historians still argue whether these monastic routines, rising before dawn, eating in silence, walking single-filed down corridors, were designed more for spiritual focus or simply to keep dozens of cloistered men from strangling each other by Christmas. The consensus leans toward both. And then, there's the timekeeping. Always the timekeeping. As you step back outside, the sun hits your face and you remember something small but delightful. In one medieval monastery, monks used singing sand to measure time. A small funnel filled with sand that hissed a soft tune as it flowed through a narrow channel, like an hourglass with a soundtrack. The theory was that the tune would lull the mind and calm the spirit as the grains trickled down. It probably sounded more like wheezing, but still, a noble effort. You wander toward the chapter house now. It's not prayer time yet, but it's a good spot to wait. Cool stone benches. A few carved saints looking vaguely disappointed in you, which is just how they look. One of them has no nose. Another appears to be judging your posture. Classic saints. You sit down and think about the origins of these routines. It's easy to forget that not all monks came here willingly. Some were second sons with no inheritance. Some were dropped off at the abbey at the age of 7 and told, "Good luck, don't break anything sacred." And yet, over time, they came to live by this rhythm: the candles, the bells, the chants, the scribbles. A strange little machine made of humans and hope. And in the center of that machine, the candle. The thing about candle clocks is that they don't just measure time. They make time feel orderly. You can watch the wax shrink and say, "That's a third of a psalm, or half a confession, or exactly enough time to reflect on how long it's been since Brother Evo last caught that goose." And there were improvements, too. Some monasteries began embedding metal balls inside their candles, so when the wax melted to a certain point, the ball would drop into a brass dish with a clang. Instant notification. Early warning system. The medieval equivalent of a push alert, if your phone was made of molten animal fat. A breeze kicks up. You pull your robe tighter around your shoulders. Somewhere nearby, a bell is being tested. It gives off a flat clank, then a second note that sounds like a sigh. Probably Brother Martin again. He insists the bell rope is possessed, which is ironic, considering how many times he's been told it's just tangled. You stand and make your way slowly back to the candle chamber. On the way, you pass the kitchen where a cauldron of something grayish is bubbling away. Lentils, most likely. Or penance in liquid form. Either way, you make a mental note to eat slowly and pretend to enjoy it. Monks don't complain about meals, out loud. As you reach your station, the candle has burned another notch. The flame wavers just slightly, then steadies. Good burn rate. You note it down in your wax-stained log, next to today's date, which is written in that charming monastic shorthand that no one understands except Brother Cuthbert and possibly ravens. You look around at the tools of your strange little trade. Tongs, for straightening bent pins. A small awl, for poking neat holes. Scraps of linen for blotting excess wax. And tucked behind a spare candlestick, your secret weapon, a figure. Dried. Stolen from the guest pantry. You tell yourself it's for emergencies. This feels close enough. Quirky tidbit. In some abbeys, particularly in colder climates, the monks wrapped their candle clocks in thin parchment to protect the wax from drafts. But over time, those wrappings became miniature diaries, covered in marginal notes, jokes, and warnings like Brother Paul, "Stop sneezing on the candle, it shortens the hours." You chuckle to yourself, fig half raised, when the bell rings again, this time for the midday meal. It's a gentler bell, a lower tone. Less awaken, sinners, and more hay, it's soup time. You blow out the candle, watching as the wick curls into a wisp of smoke. Another hour done. Another step in the sacred pattern. As you walk toward the refectory, your thoughts wander. About how a simple flame guides the day. How something as humble as wax and twine can shape the life of a monastery. And how, in a world without clocks, the quietest things often speak the loudest. You file into the refectory with the others, walking in 2 neat lines, eyes down, steps matching as if you've rehearsed this since birth. Which, in a way, you have. Monastic meals are not feasts. They are ceremonies stitched together with silence and the occasional clatter of wooden spoons. You sit where you always do, fourth from the end, left side, directly under the carved beam shaped like a yawning lion. It's comforting, really. Predictable. The kind of place that lets your mind loosen slightly, stretch a bit, but not too much. This isn't that kind of place. Today's meal is, unsurprisingly, a stew. Root vegetables, lentils, and what you strongly suspect is a single parsley leaf trying its best to flavor the whole pot. You scoop it into your mouth slowly, methodically. This is not a time to rush. Meals in the monastery are accompanied by reading. One monk, selected by rotation, stands and recites scripture or theology while everyone else chews as noiselessly as possible. This monk's voice is soft and gravelly, like he's storing a secret in his throat. You like him. He makes even Leviticus sound dreamy. As the meal continues, your thoughts drift again to time, and how much effort goes into not wasting it. For all the silence, for all the spiritual reflection, monasteries are obsessed with efficiency. Hours are measured, portions are rationed, chores are scheduled down to the broomstroke. Even the candles must burn with intention. Historians still argue whether medieval monastic life was truly about divine contemplation or if it simply became an engine of labor disguised as worship. Maybe both. Maybe monks were just the world's earliest productivity hackers, minus the inspirational podcasts. And yet, despite the rules, the days don't feel rigid. They feel ritualized. Like walking barefoot across the same smooth stones over and over until your feet know the path better than your brain does. You finish your meal, bow your head in brief thanks, and rise with the others. Bowls clink into wooden tubs. Spoons are wiped clean. The reader monk closes his book with a careful thump. And then you're all back to your duties, drifting apart like petals from the same flower. Your next stop isn't glamorous, but it's necessary, the candle storeroom. Tucked beside the cloisters, past a door that sticks just enough to test your patience every single day. You give it the usual nudge curse prayer combo, and it swings open reluctantly. Inside, it smells like wax, smoke, and a hint of lavender from a sachet someone placed here last summer and forgot about. Candles, all sizes, line the wooden shelves. Some are squat and thick. Others are tall and elegant, meant for special feast days. A few have slumped sideways from the heat, giving them the posture of exhausted monks themselves. You're here to gather the next few hours' worth, 6, to be precise. You select them carefully, weighing each one in your palm, checking for evenness, for centered wicks, for the telltale signs of a bad pour. You once lit a candle that collapsed halfway through terse. That earned you a week of compost duty. Quirky tidbit: in one particularly meticulous monastery, each candle was blessed by the abbot before use, and if a flame went out mid-prayer, it was considered a divine message. Usually that message was, "This candle is terrible, try again." You carry the selected candles in a woven reed basket, frayed at the edges but still strong. There's something satisfying about it. The weight, the texture, the quiet pride of a job done well. Candle keeping isn't flashy, but it's essential. Without you, no one knows when to chant or when to nap. And monks love to nap when they're not supposed to. On your way back, you pass Brother Aldrich trimming the rose bushes with comically oversized shears. He waves a single thorny stem at you and says time, like roses, waits for no monk. Then immediately sneezes into the petals. Poetic and practical, as always. You return to the candle chamber just as the sun begins its slow slide toward the horizon. The shadows in the corridor lengthen like spilled ink, and the stained glass windows now cast patches of saffron, teal, and dusty rose across the stone floor. The abbey is beginning its evening exhale, the part of the day where everything softens a little. You light the first of the new candles. It flares briefly, then steadies. Its wax gleams golden in the low light. You notch the base with your knife, marking the hour. You make another quick scribble in your logbook. Then pause. Then sigh. It's been a long day of watching fire. But that's the strange charm of it all, how this job, this tiny flame, somehow anchors everything. Prayer happens because the candle says so. Meals, rest, chores, even those dramatic moments when Brother Matthew decides to debate Augustine with a chicken under one arm, all of it slots into place because someone, somewhere, is keeping the flame. You sit for a moment, alone again in the silence. The candle crackles softly. The wax begins its slow melt, edging toward the next pin that will drop into the basin below. When it does, the sound will echo gently through the room, reminding you, and everyone else, that it's time for Vespers. Until then, you wait. And while you do, you think about how time, in a place like this, isn't something you chase. It's something you tend. Like a garden. Or a flame. Or a grumpy monk who only speaks in riddles. You lean back in your chair. The pin drops. The bell will ring soon. You rise from your candle stool, knees cracking in quiet rebellion, and shuffle toward the bell rope. It's Vespers now, the hour of evening prayer, and you're the one in charge of signaling it. Not with flair, not with dramatic tolls like some cathedral showpiece, but with a steady, unassuming rhythm that says the day isn't over, but it's winding down. Come gather. The rope is rough in your hands, worn smooth in spots by decades of calloused fingers. You give it 3 pulls. Long pause, long. The echo reaches deep into the stone bones of the monastery, rousing monks from their chores, naps, and probably at least one unfinished theological argument. You'd be amazed how many disagreements in this place begin with, "Well, Aquinas never said that exactly." Within minutes, they begin to gather. Sandals on stone, rustling robes, the occasional throat clear from Brother Gerald, whose post-nap voice always sounds like a lute string being plucked by a squirrel. The chapel glows amber from the many small flames you helped prepare. The air smells of beeswax and incense, like a temple wrapped in a forest. You take your usual place near the back, beside the wooden column that creaks every time someone leans on it. From here, you can see the rows of familiar faces bowed in rhythm, dozing slightly, perhaps, but reverent all the same. The abbot's voice begins the chant, low and measured, as predictable and soothing as a lullaby whispered through a doorway. Historians still argue whether the monastic chants were meant more for divine connection or for quieting the mind, an early form of meditation wrapped in Latin syllables. Either way, it works. Your shoulders drop. Your breath slows. You don't even mind that Brother Clovis is once again singing half a beat early, because he does that every single day, and somehow the imperfection makes the whole thing feel more human. As the verses rise and fall, your thoughts begin to meander. Not rudely, just gently skimming the surface of your awareness. You picture the candles still burning in their measured glory, taking time forward one slow drop of wax at a time. You remember the stew from earlier, and wonder how a single carrot managed to taste so determinately like a turnip. The prayer ends. The silence that follows is richer than the sound itself. Then it's time for Compline, the final prayer before rest. Some of the older monks already look like they're halfway to sleep, slouched with peaceful expressions, as if dreaming through their own beards. You envy them a little. You've still got one task left before bed. After a short moment of personal reflection, you rise, stretch discreetly, and slip out of the chapel. The sky is bruising into deep cobalt now, with 1 or 2 shy stars poking through the haze. Somewhere, an owl tests its voice, a single questioning hoot that sounds like it's not quite ready for its night shift. You head to the storeroom one last time, this time not to fetch but to prep. Night candles. The long burners. The quiet guardians. You retrieve 3, 1 for the hallway, 1 for the abbot's chamber, 1 for the small alcove where Brother Thomas likes to write poems about saintly knees. Each candle has a little scratch near the base, your secret way of noting how it behaved last time. One of them sputtered like a wet chicken. That one goes in the hallway. You light them carefully, shielding the flames from the breeze that goes through the stone corridors. One by one, the monastery settles into its nighttime hum. Doors close with soft thuds. Beds creak. Someone coughs twice, then stops. Even the mice seem to walk more respectfully after Compline. There's a quiet comfort in these moments. No chanting, no chores, no scripture. Just the hush of the abbey wrapping itself in sleep, and the tiny flickers of fire holding vigil. You walk the long corridor once more, checking windows, peeking into corners. Not out of paranoia. This isn't a fortress, but out of care. Tending the night is part of your job, too. Ensuring the silence stays whole. That no one wakes to darkness or confusion. That the flame never goes out too soon. You reach your own cell at last. Small, spare, exactly as it should be. A narrow cot, a wool blanket, a carved wooden cross above the door. And there, beside the bed, your own little timekeeper, a single candle set into a clay dish, its pin already hovering above the wax like a watchful eyebrow. You sit on the cot, shoes off, robe loosened. You stare at the flame. It stares back, in that special way only fire can. Flickering but steady. Moving yet still. You wonder how many monks before you watched this same dance, listened to the soft hiss of wick and wax, and felt time melt into meaning. Quirky tidbit: in one abbey, the monks used scented oils in their bedtime candles, lavender for tranquility, rosemary for dreams, and in one questionable experiment, garlic to ward off nocturnal temptation. The result? Sleepless monks and a very unpopular chamber. You blow gently on your own flame, just once. A small ritual. A promise. It flutters but stays alive. Like you? Like the rhythm of this place. And then you lie down. Your eyes trace the ceiling beams above you, trying to count the tiny notches etched over the years. You lose track halfway through. Doesn't matter. The pin will drop eventually. You don't need to count hours here. You only need to listen. The hush of the monastery at night is like a woolen blanket drawn snug across the world, quiet, warm, a little scratchy. You lie there, half tangled in your own thoughts, watching the candle next to your cot. It burns slow and soft, its pin still upright, the wax beginning to puddle like a sleepy yawn. Time in this world doesn't shout, it sighs, flickers, drips. You're not the only one awake, of course. Monks rarely sleep through the night uninterrupted. Too much praying to do. Too many systems in place. This is the rule of Saint Benedict, after all, strict but comforting, like being bossed around by your favorite old uncle. Tonight, your task includes the nocturnes, the overnight prayers traditionally spaced out to jostle your soul just before it gets too cozy. You shuffle out of bed at the appointed hour, which is either midnight or some vague approximation your body has learned to interpret by candle length and gut feeling. You pull your robe back on and light the stubby torch mounted to your wall. It's mostly ceremonial, a flickering excuse to mutter "I'm not awake." You're awake under your breath as you pad down the hall. Down in the chapel, a few others gather like pale ghosts in sandals. There's no chit-chat, no winking. Just a nod or two and the rustle of habit fabric. One monk, Brother Eustace, is already kneeling and humming tunelessly. He hums through everything, prayers, chores, mild scoldings. You're not even sure he knows he's doing it. Tonight's nocturne is short, thankfully. A psalm, a pause, a final verse that trails off like a lullaby played backwards. You bow your head, whisper your part, and take a moment to stare up at the flickering stained glass window. It doesn't catch much moonlight, but in the dimness, the colored panes still glimmer like distant stars. Historians still argue whether these night prayers were truly spiritual necessities or just clever ways to keep monks from getting too comfortable with slumber. After all, an idle monk is the devil's playground. Or so said one grumpy prior whose idea of fun was alphabetical Latin drills at dawn. The truth? It's probably both. There's something undeniably sacred about rising in the dark to whisper with the divine. But also, maybe a little smug. Look at us, you think. Praying while everyone else is drooling on hay. After the final amen, you and your sleepy brothers shuffle off like a parade of candlelit turtles. One monk sneezes. Another stubs his toe and mutters something that might be Latin, might be a heresy. Back in your cell, you settle once more beneath your blanket. Your candle's lower now. Its wax has begun that lazy lean, curling over the side of the dish like a tired cat pawing at the edge of its nap. You dream for a while. Not of dragons or saints, but of bread. Huge, pillowy loaves that smell like heaven and taste like warm forgiveness. It's only when you stir slightly and hear the faint plunk of the metal pin hitting wax that you remember where you are. It's almost morning. You rise again. Your joints creak like the wooden pews downstairs. This is the final candle check. The time of lauds, the early morning prayer, approaches, and you have just enough light left to get the job done. You carry a taper down the hallway, passing other doors with their own guttering candles behind them. Some monks are already up, their silhouettes moving slowly behind thin oaken doors. You wonder if they slept, or if they simply stared at their candle the way you did. The corridor curves gently, ending at a small storage room where you keep the replacement candles. You open the creaky latch and step inside, nose immediately filled with the familiar smells: beeswax, old ash, and something that always smells faintly of raisins despite no evidence of raisins existing here. You pull 3 fresh tapers from the box, labeled with tiny notches: 1 hour, 2 hour, midnight snuff. Monastic candle labeling is less about branding and more about utility, though someone did once try to carve tiny saints into a batch, which promptly melted into vaguely unsettling blobs that looked more demonic than divine. You distribute the new candles where they're needed, pausing to adjust wicks with a little iron fork that's seen better centuries. The rhythm of it, the lighting, the pacing, the placement, feels meditative now. Almost like another prayer, but one you perform with your hands instead of your voice. Quirky tidbit: one particularly inventive abbey reportedly invented a dual-purpose candle stand that also doubled as a mouse deterrent. It spun slowly, creaking with each turn, and was said to startle rodents into repentance. Or at least back into the walls. By the time you return to the chapel, the eastern sky has begun to pale ever so slightly. Not sunrise, not yet, but the vague awareness that the world is thinking about it. You take your place for lauds, the final stretch before breakfast, and the quiet hum of the morning psalms begins. The chant winds through the cold air, lacing itself around columns and rafters like a gentle vine of sound. It's beautiful, in a half-awake kind of way. Comforting. Like being sung to sleep by someone who doesn't care if you drift off halfway through the verse. You close your eyes, letting the melody drift over you. You don't think about time anymore. The candles do that for you. And somewhere, beneath the chant, the scrape of sandals, and the slow breath of the morning wind, you swear you hear a whisper: tick-tock, drip, drop, flame, fade, sleep. The psalms wind down with the final amen, murmured low, as though even the prayers are stretching and yawning. The chapel, never loud to begin with, slips into that delicate moment of stillness when everyone is too reverent, or too tired, to make the first move. Then, with the faintest shuffle of wool and sandal leather, the monks begin to disperse. You follow the flow, back through the corridors painted gold with the first light of dawn, your candle having served its last purpose. The stub remains, a soft curl of wax and wick, left on a small brass plate near your door. It feels like clocking out, monastic edition. It's time now for a brief moment of personal routine, simple, steady, and as quiet as the rest of your day. You fold your blanket with the methodical care of someone who has made their bed every morning since the Norman conquest. Then comes the washing bowl, cold water, splashed to the face, and the slight internal whimper that comes from not having invented hot plumbing yet. Your day's labors are about to begin. But first, breakfast. The refectory smells like it always does, with smoke, stale bread crusts, and a trace of stewed barley. You file in behind Brother Eustace, who hums a version of Te Deum that might also be the melody for turnip stew. Across the table, Brother Anselm eyes a bowl of porridge with the despairing look of a man who has eaten oats every morning for 20 years and will likely do so for 20 more. As you eat, the candles that line the narrow windows burn low. These are shorter candles, meant to last just until the sun takes over. Timekeeping here, as you're learning, is a dance between fire and light, wax and wind. In wealthier monasteries, you've heard, they use intricate sand glasses to track shorter intervals. The grander abbeys have clock towers, those ornate machines that clunk and chime and remind everyone just how much time has passed and how little they've done with it. But here, you're a candle person, a wax whisperer, a slow dripper of time. The fascinating thing, one of many, if you're into monastic nerdery, is how monks use these candles with startling precision. The candles were molded in specific lengths, marked off in hour-long increments with pins or colored threads. As the wax melted and the marker dropped, you know an hour had passed. Historians still argue whether this candle system was accurate or mostly symbolic. Some suggest the wax burned inconsistently depending on the wind or bee's diet. Others insist monks used strict formulas for wick thickness and wax purity, basically, the medieval version of debugging. And that wasn't the only trick. Some monasteries implemented water clocks, too, a slow drip into a marked basin, counting time like a patient leaky roof. But those could freeze in winter. Candles, on the other hand, worked year-round, unless your storeroom got too damp and the wicks sulked. As you sip your barley tea, which tastes like if toast and sadness got boiled together, Brother Rufus begins his daily inspection of the candle stock. He's not officially in charge of timekeeping, but every monastery has one monk who gets extremely into something. And for Brother Rufus, it's wax logistics. You overhear him muttering about our lost drift, which is either a real concept or a very dramatic way of saying someone left a window open again. Outside, the morning has fully committed to itself. Birds you never see but always hear chirp like tiny feathered town criers. The garden is dew-heavy. The sky pale and honest. After breakfast, the workday begins. Today, your task is tending to the candle molds in the workshop. The candle room smells delightfully offensive. Hot beeswax, old soot, and a tang of something metallic that might be from the bronze pouring basins or possibly Brother Ambrose's sandals, which are at least 3 summers overdue for replacement. The process is simple, but oddly satisfying. You melt beeswax in a blackened pot over a low flame. The wax bubbles and sighs, taking on a golden hue. You stir with a wooden paddle that has a notch in the handle from a time someone mistook it for a tent peg. Once the wax is ready, you pour it into long iron molds. The wicks are already suspended inside, strung straight and taut with tiny lead weights. A quick drizzle, a careful top-up, and then you wait. Here's your fringe tidbit. One particularly enthusiastic monk in northern Italy once claimed to invent a candle that could ring a bell when finished burning. It involved a weight on a string and a small copper clapper. It also terrified the abbot's dog, so it was discontinued. You wipe your hands on a waxy cloth and set the newly poured candles to cool. There's something peaceful about it, the stillness, the gentle work, the sense that you're literally making time. A few hours pass. The sun moves just enough to catch the stained glass of the eastern hallway, setting the corridor aglow with warm color. You collect the cooled candles, trim their ends, and place them in racks according to their purpose: vespers, matins, scriptorium shorties, and of course, night pins. Every candle has a job. You tuck one under your arm, your personal timekeeper for the evening, and head back to your cell. There you place it gently in the brass sconce beside your bed. It leans slightly, as if already resigned to its eventual melting. It's only midday, and already you're thinking about tonight. The sun arcs a little higher now, casting long shadows across the cloister garden. You pass under the covered walkway, stone beneath your feet worn smooth by centuries of identical footfalls. Someone's pruning the lavender again. Brother Oswin, you'd wager. He insists the scent helps him remember his psalms, although you suspect it just makes his robes smell nicer. Midday in the monastery means labor. Ora et labora, pray and work, is more than a motto here. It's a structural beam, holding the entire day together. Your work today takes you to the scriptoria, the room where manuscripts are copied, one careful letter at a time. The scriptoria are always quieter than the chapel. A hush built from focus, concentration, and centuries of ink stains. You step inside and are greeted by the familiar sights: rows of desks, vellum sheets pinned under weights, and the faint but ever-present scent of lamp black and goat hide. The lamps here burn oil, not candles, easier to manage when you're leaning over delicate parchment. But time is still tracked by wax. On the supervisor's table sits a scribe's candle, designed to burn for precisely 2 hours. That's how long each scribing session lasts. When it burns down to the red wax ring, it's time for a break. You know monks who claim they can smell the wax change just before that moment, which is either a fun party trick or an early sign of needing a hobby. Your own station waits, as tidy as ever. Quill trimmed. Inkpot corked. Manuscript folio half completed. You settle into the bench and begin to work, dipping your quill and dragging it across the creamy vellum with the steadiness of someone who has already written the word ET about 40,000 times in his life. Each letter is a quiet act of devotion. Not just to God, but to order, to preservation, to legibility. The scribe's candle flickers, and you can hear it, the tiniest crackle as wax reaches wick, like it's whispering keep going. Historians still argue whether monks invented time-tracking candles themselves or simply refined existing folk practices. Some point to earlier Chinese and Islamic examples, candles with measured marks or internal weights. But the Benedictines, and later the Cistercians, took it seriously. For them, time was not just a framework. It was sacred. You pause between sentences to flex your fingers. Quill work is meditative, but it's not exactly ergonomic. The candle continues its downward journey. Its flame dances gently as if offering encouragement. You imagine it applauding your spacing. And here's a quirky fact to brighten your transcription time. In one abbey, the Candlemaster, yes, that was his official title, used to host weekly timing contests. The goal? Predict, within 5 minutes, when a standard nocturne candle would burn out. Winner got an extra plum in their supper. Monks are not above gamifying their chores. As the wax creeps down, you glance out the narrow window. The sun, too, has inched forward, though of course, you're not really supposed to watch it. Sundials are for courtyards. Inside, you rely on flame and habit, on things that can be trusted to drip predictably. The bell rings for sext, the 6th hour. Time for the midday prayers. You rise, dust your lap of parchment flecks, and file once again into the chapel. This rhythm, this constant ebb and flow between labor and prayer, is what gives the day its texture. Like a woven cloth of ink, wax, and silence. After prayers, you return not to the scriptoria, but to a new task, helping Brother Conrad inspect the candle molds. Today is maintenance day, and waxwork, like anything else, degrades if not tended to. The molds are lined up like obedient soldiers, and you begin to scrape out any residue left from previous pours. The wax shavings fall into a bucket with little papery plinks. The molds are made of iron, smoothed inside by years of use. You rub a bit of lamp oil on one to test the finish, still slick, still good. Brother Conrad grunts approvingly. He's not much for words, but you can tell he respects your candle diligence. That's high praise from a man who once claimed wax is more reliable than most bishops. Together, you test the wick weights next. These are the tiny metal pellets tied to the end of each wick to help them stay centered as the wax sets. If they're too light, the wick drifts. Too heavy, and the candle won't burn cleanly. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some monks use dried peas instead of lead weights. Allegedly, they burned with a faint spicy smell. Whether that's a nice scent or not depends entirely on how long you've been locked in a monastery with no fresh fruit. Once the molds are cleared, you help refill the melting basin. The wax is golden now, flecked with little bits of bee stuff that never quite strain out. You stir slowly, watching the air bubbles rise and pop, thinking, as you always do, how much this resembles soup. Just less tasty. Probably. Brother Conrad hums something off-key, and the warmth of the workshop makes your eyelids droop slightly. You shake it off and resume your rhythm. Dip, stir, pour, mark. Each candle you finish feels like a small victory against chaos. A minute earned. An hour counted. Outside, the sky begins its slow descent toward evening. The air cools slightly, and a breeze from the open window nudges your wax with curiosity. You light one of the newly set candles, just to test it, and watch as it catches instantly. Time begins again. The newly lit candle flickers with that peculiar steadiness monks have come to rely on. A clean flame, a slow drip. It's everything a timekeeper needs. You and Brother Conrad watch it for a moment, as if waiting for it to whisper something profound. But it says nothing, of course. It just burns. The afternoon brings a shift in the monastery's tempo. It's not quite sleepy, but it's softer. Tasks taper off. Voices lower. You're sent back to your own quarters, which sounds luxurious, but really means a stone cell about the size of a modern closet and roughly as decorative as an upturned bread bowl. Still, you like your cell. There's a tiny window with a sliver of sky. A rush mat on the floor. A shelf with your personal devotional texts, including one copy of the Rule of St. Benedict that still smells vaguely like cabbage for reasons no one can explain. And sitting at the center of your wooden writing desk is your own private candle timer. This one's a personal project. You made it yourself, with leftover wax and a brass dish scrounged from the kitchen when the abbot wasn't looking. It burns for exactly 33 minutes, or so you've claimed in casual conversation. Truthfully, it's more like 33-ish. But close enough for monastic purposes. You light it now, letting it signal the beginning of your afternoon meditation. 33 minutes is enough for 2 psalms and a good think. Maybe a short nap, if you angle your robe correctly and don't mind a stiff neck afterward. Here's something charming. Monks in colder climates used to nap with their hoods over their eyes like little wax-sealed envelopes. No one called it laziness. They called it sanctified rest, which honestly sounds much more impressive. You settle in, hands folded, gaze soft. The flame wiggles slightly as if to say, let's begin. You don't rush it. Meditation here isn't about conquering thoughts. It's more about letting them slink by quietly, like stray cats you don't want to scare off. The flame marks time, and you follow it. Historians still argue whether candle timers were more common in personal use or communal settings. Some evidence suggests that wealthier abbeys allowed senior monks to have private timepieces, while others believe any personal candlemaking was discouraged. Something about too many open flames and Brother Arnold setting the latrine alight again. You're careful, though. You keep a water bowl nearby just in case. Besides, your candle's base is lined with sand for safety. It's not elegant, but it works. As you sit in silence, the world narrows to a point. The draft from the window. The rhythmic tick of cooling stone. The muted rustle of someone turning pages in the room next door. Even the flame seems to lean into the hush. Time slows. Or maybe it clarifies. There's a tiny pinhole in your wall, and through it you can sometimes hear the novices rehearsing their chants. Right on cue, faint voices begin to rise, clumsy at first, then stronger. A mix of Latin vowels and sheer willpower. You smile without moving. Novice voices always sound a bit like songbirds caught mid-molt. Sweet, but earnest to a fault. You let them drift in and out, background music for your soft-breathing thoughts. The candle's wax forms a tiny lake around the base of the wick now. You watch it wobble and solidify, a mini geography forming before your eyes. Here's a quirky tidbit that might amuse you mid-meditation. In one particularly zealous monastery, monks labeled their candles not with hour marks, but with the names of saints. Burn through St. Peter, and it's time to get up. Reach St. Jude? Definitely nap too long. And St. Lawrence? That's when someone should check on you. Your candle's about halfway to St. Augustine, if you're honest with yourself. You take a slow breath and let your thoughts shift to the future. Not in grand terms, no crusades or councils, but in quiet ones. Will you be asked to tend the beehives tomorrow? Will your calligraphy improve if you try that new angle with the elbow raised? Even a monk's to-do list has its humble ambitions. Then, with a soft hiss, your candle hits the brass base. Meditation time is over. Not with a bell, not with a chant, but with the simple, warm logic of melted wax reaching its limit. You rise slowly, joints a bit creaky, and stretch. The room smells faintly sweet now, resin and smoke. You imagine it lingering in your robe, following you like a polite ghost. Time to rejoin the others. You fold your mat, snuff what's left of the wick, and head back out into the hallways where sandals shuffle like waves on a beach. Everyone's heading to the kitchen now. Yes, monks eat, and yes, some of them really look forward to it. Supper is plain: lentil stew with barley bread and a surprisingly bitter green you've never properly identified. But the conversation is gentle, the pace slow, and the candles, those tireless monks of wax and fire, line the tables with their usual solemn glow. And here's the comforting part: each one is timed. Each candle at the table will last exactly one meal and one prayer. When the last one gutters, it's time to rise and wash your bowl. That's how evenings work here, not with clocks or alarms, but with wax and witness. The candle timers don't shout. They don't blink or beep. They simply burn, quietly declaring that something has ended, and something else should begin. In a world full of loud reminders, there's something deeply soothing about a candle that simply goes out. Evening brings with it a hush that settles over the monastery like a woolen cloak. You walk slowly now, belly full of lentils and bread, your breath visible in the cooling corridor air. The sun is nearly gone, casting long amber shadows across the cloisters and painting the stone walls in sleepy gold. The bells haven't rung yet for Compline, the final service of the day, but you can feel it approaching. Everything is winding down, voices dim, footsteps soften, and even the sparrows nesting in the arches seem to blink more slowly. A few monks tend to the lamps, replacing sputtering flames with fresh ones, all while holding long iron tongs with an elegance that suggests decades of practice. You pass a window and pause to look out. The courtyard beyond is still, save for a cat creeping along the garden wall. It's a stray, never officially adopted but never quite chased away. One of the older monks, Brother Theodoric, swears it understands Latin better than the novices. No one doubts him. Time, like wax, is melting. Inside the church, you find your place on a worn wooden bench. The chapel is cool and echoing, filled with the comforting scent of beeswax and damp stone. Candles line the altar in precise rows. Each flame trembles just a little, as though catching its breath. Here's the thing about Compline: it's short, solemn, and dimly lit, the kind of service designed to gently escort you from wakefulness to rest. Psalms are sung in low, droning tones that feel more like lullabies than liturgy. The only real movement is the rise and fall of hooded heads. You close your eyes and hum along, not so much singing as exhaling in rhythm with the others. This is where candle clocks earn their keep. Monks in earlier centuries would measure this service not by the number of psalms, but by how long it took a small candle to burn through its marked section. Some were precise, with little brass weights inserted into the wax. When the flame reached a weight, it would fall into a metal tray with a tiny ping. That sound, barely audible in the hush, was your cue to begin or end a verse. Historians still argue whether this was more or less accurate than sand hourglasses, which were prone to sticking and cracking in cold weather. Candles didn't mind the chill. They just kept burning. As the final prayer echoes down the nave, you open your eyes. The candles on the altar are just beginning to shorten, wax pooling in graceful petals around their bases. A few monks glance up briefly, but most remain bowed, still caught in their internal prayers or quietly dozing with dignity. The service ends not with applause or declaration, but with a slow, unified bow and a collective silence that stretches for several seconds longer than necessary. It's a ritualized pause, a sacred "we're done now" with no need for punctuation. You walk slowly out of the chapel and into the cloister garden for your final circuit of the night. Some monks do laps around the herb beds, mumbling bits of scripture. Others sit on stone benches, watching the stars bloom one by one above the ivy-covered walls. The stars remind you of candle flames, flickering, countless, quietly marking time in their own celestial language. Here's a strange but lovely detail. In certain monasteries, the number of evening candles would be adjusted seasonally. In winter, more candles were lit, not because it was darker, though it was, but because monks needed a little extra encouragement to make it through those longer, colder nights. A bit of brightness for the soul. Your candle at home, yes, you've started thinking of it as home, waits patiently on your writing desk. You light it once more, not as a timekeeper now, but as a comfort. Something to watch as you unwind. It throws long, warm shadows across your parchment scrolls and the basket of half-sorted quills. The flicker plays across the spine of your devotional book, lighting up the gilt lettering in occasional flashes. You breathe in. The wax is lavender-scented, Brother Hugo's invention. He claims it promotes contemplative dreams, though others think it just smells nice. You begin to undress, folding your habit neatly onto the wooden stool. Your bed is little more than a straw-stuffed mattress under a woolen blanket, but after a day of silence and routine, it feels luxurious. You slide under the covers, and the candle flame seems to nod at you in approval. There's a lull now, where the day pauses between alertness and sleep. You lie on your side, watching the wax pool around the wick. It's not the fastest timer in the world, but it doesn't need to be. You're not tracking minutes anymore. You're measuring presence. Quirky tidbit: some monks were known to do nightly candle vigils, where they would stay awake to pray through a single candle's burn. Not multiple. Just one. It was considered a mild but noble spiritual discipline. Not too flashy, not too hard. The candle gave you a reason to stop. Tonight you don't intend to pray all the way through. But you do want to stay with the flame for a little while. Let it glow in your mind the way the chants still echo in your ears. Let it be your own silent compline, one that doesn't need Latin or rhythm or even much thought. Just breath. And wax. And stillness. Eventually your eyelids begin to droop. The shadows lengthen. The chill seeps into the corners of the room, but the blanket is thick, and your body is already drifting. The candle burns lower. And so do you. You wake before the sun. Or rather, you are stirred by something softer than waking, a subtle sense that the air has shifted, that the cold has moved closer to your skin, and that time, as ever, has quietly crept forward. The candle is gone. Nothing but a short stump remains in the dish on your desk, a hardened puddle of lavender wax encasing the spent wick. It must have gone out while you slept, exactly as designed. No flames licked the wood. No smoke stirred the stone walls. Just a quiet fade into darkness. A monk's idea of a perfect ending. Outside your window, the sky has yet to decide what kind of morning it will be. It hovers in that liminal state between navy and gray, pierced by the occasional star that hasn't yet surrendered to the coming light. You sit up slowly, joints popping like acorns underfoot, and swing your feet onto the cold floor. There's no rush. Morning prayers won't begin for another short while, and for once, you're not the one responsible for lighting the chapel candles. Brother Matthias volunteered in exchange for your help with his sheep illustration project later this week. Monastic bartering at its finest. You wrap yourself in a thick woolen robe and shuffle toward the wash basin. The water is cold, sharp, and somehow a little sweet, like snow that hasn't decided to fall yet. You splash your face with the sort of hesitant bravery that only monks and sleepwalkers understand. Here's a curious fact. In some monastic traditions, monks believe that cold water in the morning not only purified the flesh but also startled the soul into alertness. A spiritual slap, if you will. Of course, some modern historians argue this was just a convenient justification for the lack of indoor heating. But the intention still counts. As you towel your face dry, you glance again at the candle stump. You pick it up and roll it in your hand. It feels like smooth stone. There's something satisfyingly final about it. Like the wax completed its task and left behind a tiny tombstone of usefulness. You wonder how many candles you've used since arriving. A dozen? 2 dozen? Each one a silent co-laborer, helping you mark time, prayers, thoughts, or simply the moment between moments. You begin to see why monks used them not just practically but symbolically. Wax was the hourglass of the soul, melting instead of falling, glowing instead of ticking. By the time you make your way to the refectory, the other brothers have begun to appear, shuffling in like sheep in various shades of sleepy. Most are still silent, eyes crusty, mouths chewing absent-mindedly on pieces of dry bread. A pot of barley porridge bubbles in the corner, tended by a novice who may or may not be fully conscious. You sit at the long wooden bench and take your portion. It's not thrilling fare, but it's warm and grounding. A spoonful of honey glistens on top, Brother Juniper's idea. He claims it helps with digestive contemplation, though no one knows what that means. Across the table, someone mumbles about the candle in the main hallway burning too fast last night. The wax dripped before midnight, apparently, which threw off the bell's schedule by nearly 12 minutes. A scandal in candle time. You smile. This is not new. Candle disputes have existed for centuries. There are stories of monks in 11th century Cluny who would remark the wax every few days, convinced their measurements were being warped by humidity or dishonest beeswax merchants. Historians still argue whether these monks were obsessive or just precise. Then again, in a world without clocks, candles were your only loyal companions. If the candle betrayed you, what else could you trust? After breakfast, you joined Brother Matthias in the scriptorium. The room smells like ink and dust, parchment and patience. He's already there, hunched over a half-finished illumination of Psalm 91. You can tell he's been at it for hours. A circle of candlelight surrounds him like a halo made of effort. Morning, he says without looking up. Did your candle last the night? You nod. Burned clean. He grins. Perfect. You're ready then? Let's talk sheep. This is not a metaphor. Brother Matthias has been working on an illustrated bestiary for nearly 3 seasons. The page on sheep has proven strangely tricky. The proportions never look quite right, and his last attempt resulted in something that resembled a fluffy lizard. You've been roped into helping because, apparently, you once mentioned your uncle raised livestock. You sit beside him and begin sketching from memory. A gentle curve of the back. Knobby knees. Ears like crumpled parchment. Candlelight pools around your hands as you work. It's cozy, like the inside of a snow globe, everything muffled in golden. There's a quiet joy in these moments. 2 monks, hunched in companionable silence, creating beauty for no one in particular. The sheep on the page may never be admired outside these walls, but that's not the point. The act of making it, of lighting a candle, dipping your quill, shaping something small and strange, that's what keeps time in here. After an hour, the flame flickers low. You lean back and stretch. Your neck protests, but your eyes sparkle just a little. The sheep looks plausible. Maybe even a bit majestic, if you squint. Not bad, Matthias murmurs, and you accept the praise like a warm blanket. Outside the window, the day has fully arrived. The sky is soft blue, and the birds in the cloister garden are discussing something urgent in chirps and whistles. Somewhere far off, the bell tower sings its morning note, just one strike, a simple tone that echoes through the stone like a heartbeat. You tidy your tools, gently blow out the candle, and watch the last wisp of smoke curl toward the ceiling. It dances for a second, then fades. Time, once again, has melted. By mid-morning, the abbey is humming with activity, not loud, but layered, like the low buzz of a beehive behind stone walls. You wander toward the cloister, your sandals brushing against weather-smoothed flagstones, the scent of damp moss rising from the garden nearby. Monastic life is rhythmic, not rigid. It moves like candle wax, flowing and pooling rather than ticking and striking. There are no alarms, no blinking screens, no push notifications, unless you count the abbot's occasional throat clearing when someone forgets to wash their inkpot. The candle, in this place, does the job of timekeeper, encourager, and gentle scold, all in one. You remember something Brother Peter once told you during a long walk around the abbey walls. A candle doesn't demand attention, he said. It just fades. And if you've forgotten what you were doing, it reminds you with darkness. Wise words, though you're fairly sure he borrowed them from a dusty tract on Benedictine time management. The garden awaits you just past the archway, a square of quiet life framed by arched stone walkways. Violets and wild sage curl along the borders. Bees zip industriously from flower to flower, probably keeping better schedules than some of the brothers. You pause near the sundial in the garden center. It's mostly symbolic these days, more of a sunny ornament than a functional timepiece. Still, it catches the light beautifully. Around its base are the Latin words, Utera ora, non numero, use the hour, not the number. There's something comforting about that. Monks didn't count hours the way we do. They used them, according to task and prayer and candle length. If something took longer, then so be it. If it ended early, even better. There was no stopwatch, only wax. Some historians still argue whether this looser structure helped or hindered monastic productivity. Certain scholars claim it encouraged reflection and internal order. Others think it led to a lot of daydreaming and half-finished sheep illuminations. But no one disputes the importance of that steady flame in guiding each moment. You sit on a low stone bench and pull a small prayer booklet from your sleeve. It's a humble thing, hand-stitched, dog-eared, faintly stained with wax and barley porridge, but you like it that way. There's something reassuring about frayed edges. It means something's been used, not just stored. The prayer you murmur is short, almost more breath than words. It's not one of the official ones for this hour, but you've grown fond of it. A psalm about waiting, about trusting the slow unraveling of time, about keeping your lamp lit through the long watches of the night. From the opposite walkway, Brother Adelard approaches with his usual flurry of robes and papers. He's the Abbey's unofficial inventor, always trying to improve things that most monks have long since accepted. Last season, he tried to build a candle with a hidden spring-loaded bell. It worked exactly once, then launched the bell straight into Brother Theobald's gruel. There were oaths on the ceiling for weeks. Today, Adelard is holding a wooden frame with a series of tiny wax columns inside. They look like candle teeth. Behold, he says, without so much as a greeting, the multi-interval luminary. You blink. Is it dangerous? He grins. Not unless you count the potential for enlightenment. He explains it's a system of small candles calibrated to burn at different rates, 15 minutes, 30, 60, all nestled in a neat row. Perfect for writing letters, timing speeches, or knowing exactly how long Brother Hubert's sermons actually last, he says, nudging you conspiratorially. You have to admit, it's clever. If a bit unnecessary. But then again, isn't that half the charm of monastic life? Doing unnecessary things with great care? You offer to help him test it later. He beams, then scurries off to find more wax. Likely the good beeswax this time, not the crumbly stuff that smells like scorched cabbage. As you watch him disappear into the hallway, you're reminded of how much time monks spend thinking about time. Not just tracking it, but sculpting it. Molding it into prayer, study, silence. They didn't want to escape time. They wanted to hold it gently, like a candle flame you protect from the wind. That's why the candle timer endured. Even as mechanical clocks emerged in towns and cities, the monks kept lighting wax. Not out of stubbornness, but reverence. A clock measures time. A candle marks it. Quietly, gracefully, and always with a little warmth. Back in the scriptorium, you find a curious parchment tucked beneath your writing board. It's an old inventory sheet, long since yellowed. At the top, in firm ink, it reads, Wax expenditures, winter season. Below are neat columns tallying the candles used in the infirmary, the guest rooms, the kitchen, and even the latrines. At the bottom is a short note, scribbled in the margin, more wax required. Brothers cannot pee in the dark forever. You smile. Some things, you realize, never change. You roll the parchment up and slip it into your robe. A little souvenir of the candle's quiet dominion. Outside, the shadows have shifted again. The sun is pushing closer to its zenith. Birds still flit, bees still buzz, and deep inside the abbey's belly, candles still flicker in half-forgotten corners. You rise from the bench, stretch, and feel the day pulling forward. Not racing. Just unfolding. Somewhere, someone strikes flint against stone. A new flame is born. And the wax begins its patient countdown once again. You trail back through the cloister, following the same smooth flagstones, except now the sunlight has shifted angles and lengthened shadows creep up the stone walls like silent ivy. The air smells warmer, rosemary and beeswax mingled with the faint char of a chimney somewhere deeper in the abbey. This part of the day belongs to labor, not prayer, not silence, but the humble, rhythmic work of keeping a place like this functioning. It's called opus manuale, or manual labor, and yes, it's exactly as thrilling as it sounds. But also quietly meditative. You're assigned to the candle-making shed today, which is equal parts artisanal workshop and medieval version of an accidental chemical hazard zone. The door creaks open to reveal rows of clay pots, soot-stained benches, and hanging cords that look like ghostly laundry. The scent inside is thick. A blend of hot tallow, singed linen, and something that might have once been lavender before time and heat got to it. Candle making in a medieval monastery isn't just a chore. It's a cornerstone. These humble sticks of light are sacred instruments, burned for vigils, services, midnight scribbling, and, most charmingly, timed prayer alarms. Historians still argue whether monks preferred beeswax for its sweet, clean burn or because it smelled marginally less like boiled goat feet. Either way, wax was worth its weight in illumination. You help Brother Ambrose stir a bubbling vat of tallow, which, let's be honest, looks a lot like what happens when you leave soup out for too long in July. He dips lengths of wick into the mixture with the kind of serene expression usually reserved for stained glass angels. Dip and dry, child. Dip and dry. That is the rhythm, he hums. It sounds like a proverb. Or a very slow dance move. You catch the rhythm quickly, lower the wicks, count the beats, raise them slowly, then hang them on a wooden rack to cool. Over and over. It's not glamorous. But it's calming. Each candle grows thicker by degrees, just as your thoughts begin to grow quieter. The walls of the candle shed are etched with soot-smudged notes from monks past, little carved initials, wax strips shaped like accidental saints, and one curious phrase scratched near the window: time melts. So do we. Philosophical graffiti is still graffiti. As you work, Brother Ambrose explains how monks used to measure their studies in candles. One wax taper could mark a short chapter. A full pillar candle might span the entire book of Psalms, if you read slowly and stopped for snacks. There's a story he tells, one you've heard before, but always like to hear again, about the monk who became so absorbed in copying a text that he didn't notice the candle had burned all the way down, lighting his sleeve on fire. Instead of panicking, he simply whispered amen, patted out the flame, and kept writing with his left hand while nibbling oat bread with the other. Whether that happened or not, no one's quite sure. But it certainly feels true. You learn that candle timers were sometimes even more sophisticated than they looked. Some had tiny embedded pins that would drop into metal trays as they melted, ping, to mark the passing of time. Others were measured against a strip of parchment labeled by the inch. And some were scented differently in layers, so a monk might sniff the air and know whether it was time for matins or vespers based on whether the room smelled like frankincense or myrrh. It's candlecraft meets chronoaromatherapy. Outside the shed, you hear the faint chime of the iron bell in the refectory tower. Not the loud clang of official prayer time, just a friendly reminder that lunch is somewhere in your future if you don't dawdle too long among the wax vats. You set your final row of dipped candles to dry and wipe your hands on a cloth that might once have been white. Your fingers smell like beeswax and mystery herbs. A scent you wouldn't describe as pleasant, but certainly timeless. Brother Ambrose thanks you with a smile and a joke about how you're just waxy enough now to pass for an extra candle. You chuckle, mostly out of politeness. But hey, in a monastery, even the jokes are chaste. As you step back into the midday light, your eyes blink against the sun. The transition from the dim shed to the wide, open cloister always feels a little like stepping through time. Inside, shadows and flickering warmth. Outside, sunbeams and birds arguing over breadcrumbs. You pass a younger monk sketching out candle measurements in the dirt with a stick, trying, it seems, to calculate the burn rate needed for a candle to last through an entire homily on divine patience. You wish him luck. That's an ambitious goal. There's something peaceful in knowing that entire abbey routines once hinged on something so simple. No ticking clocks, no screeching bells. Just a wick, a flame, and the soft pooling of wax. And while towns and cities outside the abbey walls would eventually roar into the mechanical age, clock towers ticking, gears grinding, levers clanking, the monastic world held to its candles just a little longer. Why? Historians still argue whether it was stubbornness, symbolism, or a healthy distrust of things with too many springs. But whatever the reason, the candle endured. You pause before the chapel doors. Inside, a single candle has already been lit before the altar. Not to mark time, but to remind everyone of something softer. That light, like time, doesn't always need to be loud to be important. And so you breathe in deeply. The air carries hints of rosemary, dust, old wax, and maybe, just maybe, the faintest trace of sacred quiet. After lunch, barley stew and hard bread with a whisper of cheese, you're ushered gently toward the scriptorium. Not hurried. Nothing here is hurried. Even the bees in the garden buzz at half speed, as though respecting the vow of quiet industriousness. The scriptorium smells like it always does: ink, old vellum, dust, and the faint trace of lemon balm that Brother Cuthbert insists keeps the flies away. A theory historians still argue about, mostly because flies don't read, and monks rarely cited sources. Inside, light filters in through narrow windows, barely wide enough for a hand, but just enough to illuminate the worktables in golden slants. Each desk is set with quills trimmed just so, ink pots made of horn, and manuscript pages in various states of scribbled over glory. Your task today is simple: help with rubrication. You won't be copying scripture or illuminating the Virgin Mary in sapphire robes. That's for monks who can spell consistently and don't spill things. No, you'll be adding the little red bits. The rubrics. Headers, chapter openings, important, do not miss this part, markings. The medieval equivalent of highlighter pens. You sit beside Brother Pascal, a man who has not smiled in 3 years but reportedly once smirked during a particularly enthusiastic passage about Saint Apollonia. His handwriting looks like it was forged by the hand of God himself, precise, elegant, and mildly intimidating. Hold your breath when you draw a line, he advises. Better faint than smudge. You nod, and with cautious fingers, begin tracing small red capitals into the margins of a psalter. Each one takes 3 full minutes. You know this because the candle beside you, yes, another candle, has reached the first pin mark since you began. Rubrication isn't glamorous. It's the punctuation of the medieval book world. But there's satisfaction in it. Watching a dull page bloom with scarlet initials like little banners planted along a parade route. Brother Pascal shares an old rubricator's joke, whispered just above the scratch of quill tips. A monk once asked, "Where's the glory in coloring letters?" And the abbot replied, "Well, where's the glory in pruning roses?" Yet someone must do it. You both smile. Sort of. And yet the job has weight. In a world where most people can't read, and books are hand-copied over years, adding a red H at the beginning of "Here, O Israel" isn't just decoration, it's theological neon signage. There's a fringe theory, you hear it from one of the novices, that red ink was originally used not for clarity, but to ward off errors. A kind of scribal superstition. That the color itself had power to protect meaning. Historians still argue whether that's mystical nonsense, or just practical visibility. But the idea lingers like a faint incense. You pause to stretch your fingers and glance around. The scriptorium hums with the softest sounds imaginable, parchment rustling, a throat being gently cleared, the occasional pft of a frustrated monk blotting out a mistake with scraped pumice. On the far end of the room, someone is working on a full illumination. You catch a glimpse of gold leaf being pressed into a halo, so delicate you wonder if breathing too hard would scatter it across the floor. It's a scene of St. Bridget blessing cows, because, as you've learned, cows were very big in Irish hagiography. Possibly even more revered than some bishops. The hours slip by this way, marked only by the rise and fall of the sunbeam on your desk. The candle's second pin drops with a tiny tink, startling you into a line that leans ever so slightly to the left. You freeze. Brother Pascal peers over. Pauses. Nods once. Not ideal, he murmurs, but survivable. Encouraging words in monastic calligraphy, really. Eventually, the work breaks for none, the mid-afternoon prayer. Everyone files slowly into the chapel, joints creaking and backs groaning from too many hours hunched like question marks. Even monks have their limits. You trail behind, fingertips stained with crimson and a tiny smear of gold from when you tried to help with a leafing error. You will probably not be invited to leaf again. But hey, at least your rubricated P glows like a miniature sunrise. In the chapel, candles flicker to life once more, each flame carefully lit by the sacristan with a thin taper. The collective shuffle of sandals on stone fills the room with a rhythm like waves on sand. The chants begin, soft, slow, anchored in Latin that you barely follow but always feel. You let your mind drift during the psalms. Not disrespectfully. Just softly. Like a wax drip rolling down a warm taper. Outside, a wind rattles the herbs in the garden. Inside, the voice of Brother Simeon, who sings a half beat too late, adds a human wobble to the chant. It's imperfect. It's lovely. You think back to that manuscript on your desk. How many hands have added red ink across centuries, with trembling fingers and murmured prayers? How many copied the same passage and never once spelled Jericho the same way? How many worried they'd miss a page and be smoked by divine proofreading? And yet, the book's endured. And so does the work. Quiet, slow, oddly satisfying. When the prayer ends, you file out with the others. Brother Pascal claps a hand on your shoulder. Your rubrics were legible, he says. You may return tomorrow. High praise. You return to the scriptorium, snuff your candle, and carefully set your quill back into its wooden groove. Another page finished. Another candle down. Another flicker of red ink in the long story of light and letters. Evening shadows stretch long fingers across the abbey grounds, and you find yourself headed toward the kale factory, the warming room, because, as everyone knows, even the most stoic monk has toes. And those toes, after a day hunched in the cold scriptorium, deserve warmth and the faint illusion of comfort. The kale factory isn't exactly cozy. It's functional. A stone chamber with one large hearth, perpetually attended by whichever novice lost the rôdereau that week. Tonight, it's Brother Leofric, and he's doing a passable job of looking like he knows how to poke embers with the proper balance of reverence and aggression. You sink onto a wooden bench, back pressed to the cool wall, boots stretching out toward the single source of heat like a lizard sunning itself on a medieval radiator. Around you, the monks settle into their evening rituals. Some mend their habits, fingers looping thread with surprising delicacy. Others peel onions for tomorrow's pottage, the smell mingling with wood smoke and faint ash. One ambitious brother is attempting to clean his writing desk with a mix of vinegar and strong opinions. You overhear a discussion about the exact number of psalms one should sing during midnight vigils. It grows heated, in the way only extremely sleep-deprived people can argue about very minor religious protocol. 150, huffs Brother Eligius. Unless one is dead, in which case excused, but only partially. It's a strangely comforting place. Not quiet, but not noisy. A low, rumbling hum of human activity at its gentlest volume. Monks don't gossip much, but they do debate, share riddles, and retell stories in voices meant not to echo. Tonight, someone retells the tale of the monk who tried to invent a self-turning spit using a trained squirrel. You suspect embellishment. Historians still argue whether the squirrel existed, or whether it was just a clever metaphor for unpredictable machinery. And then, there it is, the softest tickle of curiosity in the back of your brain. The candle clocks. You nudge Brother Leofric. Is it true they used candle timers for waking up? You whisper. He grins, teeth a little soot-smudged. True as St. Benedict's toenails. Charming! Apparently, in the winter months, when mornings came slower than confession lines after feast days, monks relied on carefully marked candles to rouse themselves for vigils. Not everyone, mind you, just those designated to ring the bell or light the torches. These were the licernarii, the light-bearers. No pressure. The candles were tall, plain tallow, sometimes dipped in beeswax if they were feeling flush. A pin or tiny metal ball would be placed at a precise height in the wax. As the candle burned down, it reached the pin, which would fall onto a small tin plate with a distinct ping. That served as an audio nudge to get up and start matins. Primitive? Yes. Effective? Arguably. Endearing? Deeply. Some abbeys, you're told, got fancy with it, inscribing marks along the candle to denote half-hour intervals, adding color bands, even hollowing out tiny chambers that would hiss or sputter at particular moments. The earliest form of snooze button? Perhaps. Though snoozing wasn't exactly part of the rule. One monk, Brother Basil, claimed to have modified a candle with 2 pins and a bit of wax string that would, when burned, tug open a shutter to let moonlight fall directly on his face. A luminous slap to the forehead, if you will. Whether this worked or just lit his pillow on fire remains, as ever, a subject of debate. The practicality of these candle clocks depended heavily on the steadiness of wax burn, which was notoriously moody. A draft from a cracked window? Off by 10 minutes. Candle too wide? You'd be late for lauds. Mouse nibble at the base? Well, then you're waking up in total darkness, wondering why your bell rope is on fire. And yet this little system, this quiet, flickering, waxy contraption, kept entire monasteries in time with the divine. You gaze into the hearth, imagining a line of monks rising like ghosts at the soft plink of pin on tin, their breath clouding in the pre-dawn chill as they shuffle toward the chapel, candles in hand, prayers still tangled in sleep. There's something beautiful in the idea. That light, not clocks, not bells, governed their sense of time. That rising wasn't dictated by gears or alarms, but by the slow, steady melting of flame and fat. Organic. Imperfect. Like life itself. You ask Leofric if they ever slept through the ping. Oh sure, he says. Then you get a talking to from Brother Odo, who has the spiritual grace of a thistle. Someone coughs from across the room. Brother Odo once slept through a flood. Another adds, he once excommunicated a rooster for crowing too soon. Laughter bubbles. Quietly. Reverently. You smile. The fire pops, and a bit of ash spirals upward like a lost soul on holiday. The monks begin to drift out one by one, off to finish their prayers or check the dormitory candles. Leofric stays behind, poking at the coals with the careful glee of someone who understands their job won't exist once spring arrives. You rise, warmed in more ways than one, and stretch your legs. Your boots are nearly dry. Your fingers smell faintly of onions and wax. As you step out into the cloister walk, the cold hits you, but it's bearable now. Your body holds the memory of heat, and your mind holds the image of candlelit monks ticking their way through time, not by machine, but by glow and hope. You walk slower than usual, watching your breath mingle with the night air. Somewhere in the distance, a single ping echoes faintly. And just like that, you feel ready for the next thing. Whatever flickers your way. Your path curves gently beneath the cloister arch, and you pause to listen. Just for a moment. The soundscape here is subdued, your own footsteps softened by the stone underfoot, the low groan of timber beams contracting in the cold, and somewhere, distantly, the shuffle of someone rearranging firewood with a sense of purpose only monks can muster at this hour. The abbey is quiet now. Not asleep. Monasteries don't sleep, not really, but hushed, in the way an old library might breathe between pages. You duck into the corridor leading to the dormitory, past a small alcove filled with things you hadn't noticed before. Oddments. Candles, of course, half-burnt, marked with little charcoal lines, their bases charred or pooled with melted wax like the remains of an overworked pastry. A small crate labeled Defunct Alarms catches your eye. Inside, a tangle of pebbles, copper thimbles, string, and what appears to be a carved turnip with a hole bored straight through. You pick it up. It smells faintly of regret and root vegetables. Apparently, monks got creative. Because yes, after the candle alarms came other versions. The mechanical clock would eventually find its way into monastic life, but long before that, innovation took quirky detours. Imagine it, you, trying to fulfill your divine obligations, wide-eyed at midnight, squinting at something Brother Hubert insists is a bell-triggering gourd mechanism. Some monks tried oil lamps with floating markers that would ring a bell when lowered to a certain depth. Others strung tiny tripwires along their pallets, attached to strings connected to bells, feathers, or in one case, a wooden chicken that would fall and cluck. Historians still argue whether these devices were genuinely functional, or just evidence of monks having a little too much time on their hands and a mildly competitive sense of spiritual punctuality. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, of an abbey in northern France where the novice in charge of timekeeping rigged a water organ to chime at intervals, only to accidentally flood the dormitory when the vessel overflowed. The organ survived. The bedding did not. But none of this is foolish, not really. In a world without batteries, silicon, or even reliable glass, timekeeping was an act of faith and inventiveness. Keeping vigil meant more than staying awake. It meant aligning oneself with rhythms both natural and divine. The candle became a symbol. The dripping water, a metaphor. Even the half-melted gourd? A reminder that time passes whether you're ready or not. And this monastery, like so many others, took that to heart. You head toward the dormitory door and push gently. Inside, a long row of narrow pallets waits in calm silence, straw mattresses under thick woolen covers, a few still occupied by the gentle lumps of sleeping monks. A small brazier near the center glows faintly, casting amber shadows on the ceiling like the slow-turning pages of a night-bound psalter. Your bed is near the end. It's not grand, but it's dry and warmish, and someone's tucked a folded piece of cloth beneath the pillow, a courtesy or a mild prank, hard to tell. You sit, exhaling slowly, and the straw creaks like a patient old friend. On the small shelf beside the bed sits a stubby candle, marked in 3 notches. Each one signifies a quarter of an hour, or, in monastic terms, just enough time to debate a translation, sip thin broth, or develop a minor personal theology. You light it anyway. Not for timing, but for company. The flicker comforts you more than expected. Across from you, Brother Aldred snores with gentle determination, as if defending the dreamscape from heresy. His blanket rises and falls like the tide, and you wonder what time he'll wake. There's no alarm clock. No digital tones. Just instinct, candlelight, and that deep, mysterious rhythm that guides monks to rise precisely when they need to. And you? You're still half awake, wrapped in the story of how something as simple as melted wax once shaped entire schedules, governed sacred routines, and sparked debates that echo through history like a very slow chime. A few more curiosities linger in your mind. Like the abbey that tried scent alarms, candles embedded with herbs or oils that would release a distinct aroma as they burned. Mint meant matins. Lavender? Time to prep the herbs for medicinal use. One brother claimed he'd once awoken to the smell of rosemary, and immediately began reciting psalms in his sleep. Nobody could confirm if they were the correct psalms. Then there was the experiment with metal filaments inserted in beeswax, designed to burn faster and trigger bells more promptly. It worked for a week, until the wax collapsed and the filament catapulted across the chapel like a medieval bottle rocket. You lie back. The candle sputters faintly, casting wobbly halos on the ceiling. It's not trying to wake you, just to remind you of the quiet beauty of time when measured by glow, not glare. You're not ready to sleep just yet, but you're drifting. Thoughts loosening. Images slipping past in softened patterns. Brother Leofric once told you he still prefers candle timers over water clocks. Wax, he said, doesn't argue with the moon. You didn't understand it then. You almost do now. Outside, the rain begins again. You hear it tap lightly against the narrow panes in the dormitory walls, a soft, irregular rhythm like fingers drumming idly on an ancient table. It's the kind of sound that feels older than language, like something monks would have written psalms about just to give it the reverence it deserves. You close your eyes for a moment, letting that sound fill the space behind your thoughts. But something else draws your attention. A glint of metal. Faint. Curious. You rise, quietly, gently, so as not to wake Brother Aldred or startle the brazier, and make your way to a small alcove near the northern wall. There, nestled between a rolled-up scroll and a modest wooden chest, sits a curious mechanism. It's a candle alarm, yes, but a different breed. This one is encased in a small bronze housing, ornately etched with what looks like Latin prayers and, somewhat inexplicably, a cat wearing a bishop's mitre. You reach forward and gently lift the lid. Inside, a short beeswax candle sits in a metal tray. Beneath it, a simple lever mechanism. A thread runs from the base of the candle to a small bell mounted to the side. As the candle burns, the wax weakens the thread until, ping, The bell rings. Genius! Medieval. Slightly absurd. You smile. This is what you've come to understand. Monks didn't just keep time, they crafted it. They bent wax and wick and gravity itself into a system of sacred regularity. There were no apps, no notifications, no flashing lights. Just silence, patience, and a little metallurgy when the mood struck. And while this device is elegant, it's not unique. Similar creations can be found in the annals of monasteries from Britain to Bavaria. Some with sliding pebbles that dropped into bowls. Others with carved notches that released the tiniest of hammers to tap on ceramic cups. Historians still argue whether these tools were meant more for practical devotion or symbolic gestures, an effort to show time literally melting away in service to God. You return to your straw mattress, the rain still whispering across the windows. That phrase lingers, melting time. There's something beautiful in it. Something ancient. By now, the candle you lit earlier has begun its slow descent, wax pooling like golden syrup around the base. You glance at it, half expecting it to whisper a psalm or call you to prayer. But it just glows, quietly doing its job. In your half-drowsy state, you remember a story Brother Everwin once told. He claimed a monk in southern Italy devised a multi-stage candle alarm that could signal different events through different smells. Yes, smells. The trick was to embed certain herbs: rosemary for morning prayer, frankincense for meditation, cinnamon for kitchen duty, at measured intervals down the length of the candle. As the wax burned, each scent would be released into the room, alerting nearby monks with a sensory nudge rather than a jarring bell. Did it work? Not especially well, according to Everwin. The kitchen often smelled like meditation and the chapel like soup. But the attempt was noble. And that's the theme, really. Monastic timekeeping wasn't about perfection. It was about attention. Intent. Turning something as basic as keeping a schedule into a practice of craftsmanship, devotion, and yes, occasional misfires involving flammable herbs and confused chickens. There's something to admire there. You think of how modern time nags us with urgency, flashing screens, chirping alerts, countdowns. Time as demand. Time as pressure. But here, in this candlelit, rain-touched monastery, time simply happens. It glows. It pools. It rings a bell at the end and thanks you for waiting. You ease back down onto the mattress, arms folded across your chest, and stare at the ceiling, where candlelight plays like lazy fish just beneath the surface of a pond. You feel no pressure to sleep, yet sleep comes closer. Across the room, a soft chime sounds. Someone's candle alarm has just finished its slow, deliberate countdown. The bell is gentle, like a wind chime nudged by a cat with excellent manners. A shape stirs in the shadows. Sandals whisper on stone. The brother doesn't speak. Just lights a new candle from the ember of the old and pads softly out into the hall. The cycle continues. You wonder how many candles have burned like this over the centuries. How many monks rose without speaking, lit a new wick, and carried it into another dark corridor. And how many times someone watched the little device fail, melting too fast, ringing too late, or simply sputtering out mid-schedule, and just sighed, adjusted the wick, and kept going. Because the sacred wasn't in the flame. It was in the trying. The small, faithful attempts to bring order to the chaos. Even if your alarm smelled faintly of onions or released a bell with all the force of a hiccup. You let that thought settle. The candle beside your bed flutters now, ready to yield. You don't mind. The night still has time to melt. You don't rise this time. Instead, you listen. The stone walls cradle each sound like a careful librarian shelving whispers. Somewhere in the distance, a soft clatter, a ladle in a clay pot, perhaps. Or a bucket being nudged by a sleepy elbow. Then quiet again, as if the monastery itself is exhaling. Your fingers trail across the coarse wool blanket tucked under your chin. The room still smells faintly of beeswax, iron, and worn leather, a scent equal parts chapel and saddlebag. It's comforting in a way no modern plug-in air freshener could replicate. You think for a moment about the monks who never slept through the night. It wasn't just prayer schedules that kept them busy. Some, particularly in the larger orders, had jobs so tied to the hours that their sleep became a patchwork quilt of naps. The watch monks rose early to prepare fires, light lanterns, or inspect the roof slates for signs of leaks. In rain like this, that last one was practically a full-time job. But what about the candle tenders? You imagine them, assigned not to prayer or cooking or script copying, but to monitoring the timekeeping candles. Lighting them. Marking their lengths with bits of charcoal. Sharpening the thin wires or repositioning the little bells. It sounds dull. And yet, maybe that's the point. Dull jobs have a strange power, especially in a world as loud and rushed as yours. Monks knew that. They leaned into the boredom. Took it as a challenge to find grace in repetition. Meaning in routine. Some orders even embraced silence completely. Imagine adjusting a candle alarm in perfect stillness, your breath the only sound. You trim the wick, reposition the dish, smooth the wax edges like a tiny sculpture, and return it to its alcove, all without a single word. No distractions. No productivity apps. Just task and time. Wax and will. Historians still argue whether these silent rituals were meant to cultivate inner peace or simply keep the brothers from gossiping. Either way, they worked. And here's where the story grows even stranger. Because once word of the candle alarms got out, mostly via visiting scribes and traveling clergy, they started popping up outside the monasteries. In noble houses. In town halls. Even in universities. Everyone suddenly wanted a waxy, monk-approved way to wake up on time. Of course, the aristocracy had to make it fancy. You recall one tale, possibly apocryphal, of a French noblewoman in the 14th century who demanded a custom alarm candle scented with rose, shaped like a miniature unicorn, and embedded with rubies at each quarter-hour mark. Supposedly, it cost more than the local blacksmith made in a year, and smelled like burning fruitcake when lit. And then there were the pranksters. Candle alarms became a popular target for mischief. In at least one documented case, a cheeky young apprentice swapped out a brother's wax for lard, causing the candle to collapse into a puddle mid-vigil and splatter the Book of Hours with pork grease. It took 3 days and a vat of vinegar to get the smell out. Still, most people respected the candle method. It was reliable, quiet, and if done well, almost poetic. It's why certain abbeys began developing candle clocks. Yes, clocks. Large, multi-wick contraptions with carefully measured intervals that marked hours not with ticks, but with scent, sound, and shadow. You picture one now, a tall bronze frame, perhaps in the shape of a tree or crucifix, with several candles mounted at staggered heights. As each one burns down, a bell tings. A shadow moves. A carved figure bows. No electricity. No gears. Just fire. Oddly elegant. You stretch one leg under the blanket, the straw mattress crinkling in sleepy protest. It's hard not to admire the ingenuity of it all. Modern minds like to think they invented time management, but monks were color-coding their schedules and setting timers when most people still thought sneezing was caused by evil spirits. And yet, for all their cleverness, monks were never in a rush. Their hours flowed like the wax itself, slow, steady, inevitable. One melted into the next. Matins into lauds. Lauds into prime. Prime into breakfast, if you were lucky and didn't mess up the psalm readings. It gives you a strange sense of comfort, doesn't it? That somewhere, even now, a small group of people might still be marking time not by alarms or screens, but by the gentle pool of golden wax on a windowsill. That even in your hyper-scheduled, Google Calendar pinging world, there's a lineage stretching back to candlelight and bells. And you, wrapped in wool and quiet thoughts, get to lie here in that tradition. Just for tonight. The candle beside you gutters. A final flicker. It's not quite done, but close. Your eyes follow the melted path down its side, where rivulets of wax curl like miniature rivers through a landscape of forgotten prayers. You wonder what it's measured since you lit it. How many moments? How many breaths? You've stopped counting. Which means it's working. You lie still. Not out of fatigue necessarily, but because moving might jostle the delicate moment that settled over everything like a woolen shawl. The sort that holds warmth even after the fire dies. You can hear the candle's last crackle beside you, a quiet goodbye whispered in flame. Somewhere in the cloister, a faint creak. Maybe a wooden beam sighing in the cold. Maybe Brother Edric checking the weather again with his nose pressed to the drafty stone slit of a window. You picture him in his threadbare robe, muttering something about rain and rheumatism. The world here operates on old rhythms. Waking, praying, working, sleeping, though often in uneven patches. You think again of that old monastic idea, segmented sleep. Historians still argue whether it was born of practicality or piety. One popular theory is that people didn't sleep in long, uninterrupted stretches like we aim for today. Instead, they took first sleep, woke for an hour or two, maybe to pray, maybe to think, maybe just to sit, and then second sleep would follow. Sounds inconvenient, but also kind of nice. Because what if the night didn't have to be one long, perfect stretch of unconsciousness? What if it could be two smaller, gentler visits into rest, with a calm, candlelit interlude in between? A chance to breathe, to stretch, to read the margin notes of your thoughts. Some monks used that midnight wakefulness for meditation, others for writing. One even reportedly used it to feed the cloister cat and talk to her about theology. He claimed she had a strong stance on predestination. No one dared argue. And let's not forget the candle was there for all of it. Lit at the beginning of the first sleep. Burned softly through the wakeful midpoint. Finished its job by the second. A silent participant in their entire night. More faithful than some of the monks, if we're being honest. But the candle had competition. As you continue resting, your thoughts wander to other medieval alarm systems. Roosters, for instance. Loud, obnoxious, deeply committed to ruining dreams. Every village had one, usually named something quaint like Clovis or Godric, and despite popular legend, they were not particularly accurate. Most crowed when they pleased, usually just before you finally fell back asleep. Or bells. Great iron bells, pulled by hand or rigged with pulleys, that rang out through the stillness to mark the canonical hours. They were a kind of public timer, the ancient equivalent of a town-wide group chat pinging at 3 a.m. to say, "Matins, everyone. Let's go." But even those had drawbacks. Weather. Sleepy bell ringers. Frozen ropes. Not to mention the villagers who probably wanted to throw their shoes at the bell tower after a few too many early calls. That's why the candle held its charm. It was quiet. Consistent. Personal. And above all, beautiful. Monks treated time differently than we do. You track it with deadlines and alarms, stacking blocks of productivity like bricks. They tracked it with light. With rhythm. With bells and wax and shadows cast across cold stone. Which is not to say they didn't get stressed. Oh no. There are plenty of stories of monks fretting over missed prayers or overcooked broth. One record even mentions a young friar having a minor breakdown because he couldn't remember the 5th line of Psalm 119 during a midnight recitation. He stood frozen for 6 minutes before someone gave him a pity whisper. And then there's the monk, his name sadly lost, who once accused the candle of being mischievous because it burned too quickly and made him late for morning prayers. Whether he meant it literally or poetically is up for debate. But either way, it's an oddly touching accusation. Blame the candle. Blame the time. Blame the wax that melted away your minutes before you were ready. You shift under your blanket and stare at the stub of your own candle now, barely a thumb's length left. It leans slightly, like a tired pilgrim, and the wick's glow is smaller than ever. Still fighting though. Still flickering in the stillness. The room seems to grow darker with every second. Not ominous, just soft. Like the monastery is tucking itself in. Even the rain has quieted to a distant patter, like a memory of a storm rather than the storm itself. And you realize something. All this ritual, the candles, the watches, the bells, isn't really about measuring time. It's about presence. Because you can't rush a candle. You can't tap it for more light. You just have to be there while it burns. And maybe that's the best lesson the monks had to offer: to sit with time. Not fight it. Not squeeze it or stretch it or schedule it into submission. Just sit. Let it glow. Let it soften. And then, eventually, let it fade. Which it does. Your candle gutters now, truly this time. A final stretch of flame. A soft sigh of smoke. And then, gently, the dark folds in. Not sudden. Not startling. Just full. And through that darkness comes something new. Stillness. Not emptiness. Not silence. Just a kind of calm fullness that says, the hour has passed. The wax has done its job. You can rest now. So you do. Your body doesn't move, but your thoughts gently stir, like leaves caught in the back eddies of a lazy river. Somewhere nearby, the morning creeps toward the edges of the world. But here, in this monastic hush, time doesn't leap. It drips. Like melted wax or cooled broth or patience thickening in a clay pot. You lie there, beneath your blanket, and remember, monks were not the only people who tried to tame time with clever wax tricks. You recall stories from across the medieval map, places where candles weren't just tools, but companions. In China, during the Tang dynasty, scholars marked time with incense sticks that burned at predictable intervals. Different scents denoted different hours. One record mentions a scholar who claimed he could track his productivity based on how many transitions his nostrils had endured. 4 smells before midday, he wrote. A fine effort. In Japan, time was sometimes kept by carefully measured oil lamps. A series of bowls filled with specific amounts of oil were lit in sequence, and the dimming of each flame signaled the next event. Soft, contemplative. Probably smoky. But functional. And in parts of the Islamic world, intricate water clocks made of brass, gears, and trickling basins told time not by flame, but by drip. You can imagine the gentle plink of droplets in a tiled courtyard, echoing beneath arched domes, tracking prayers and pauses. Yet no matter the region, the goal was the same: to wrap the day in some kind of shape. To keep the hours from spilling across the floor like startled grain. To gently say, now is the moment. This one. Right here. You shift slightly and think of another peculiar European invention, one much louder than candles. The knocker-upper. Not a joke. That was the actual job title. Long after the monks and their waxy timers faded into the background of timekeeping history, urban centers developed more urgent, less poetic methods of waking. In the foggy industrial streets of 18th and 19th century England, professional knocker-uppers would go door to door in the pre-dawn gloom with long poles, tapping on windows to wake up workers. It was the human equivalent of an alarm app, except colder, more damp, and entirely dependent on the enthusiasm of a person wielding a stick. Some used canes. Others used pea shooters. One woman in Manchester reportedly had a bespoke pole with a metal tip to reach third-story windows without straining her elbow. Of course, historians still argue whether the job was more helpful or simply an excuse to be nosy. Imagine the local gossip you'd overhear just from knocking on 70 windows a morning. Also, imagine the resentment. Many factory workers likely cursed their knocker-upper's name every dawn, unless, of course, they'd overslept. In which case, they were beloved angels bearing noise. You smirk slightly. Still, give the monks credit, they didn't knock. They didn't shout. They just let a candle burn. And if it burned a little too fast, well, perhaps you just weren't meant to be awake yet. You picture a cloistered scribe, hunched over vellum by candlelight, only to doze off mid-sentence. The ink blots. The quill slides. The wax tips forward like a sleepy sunflower. It's almost a bedtime story inside a bedtime story. And somehow, it feels reassuring. Because even those with strict schedules and spiritual discipline had their moments of drift. Their yawns. Their missed prayers and crooked margins. Their soft defeats to the weight of sleep. So maybe that's what this story's about. Not really the candle. Not even the monks. But the way humans, across time and geography, have tried to partner with sleep. To coax it, measure it, chase it gently. Not always to conquer it, but to prepare a path for it to arrive. Like lighting a hallway for a guest who might or might not show. Some used candle clocks. Some brewed bitter teas. Some muttered psalms or whispered spells or adjusted their pillows with the ferocity of warriors. All in pursuit of the same thing, a quiet mind. A folded hour. A space where the world paused and the self could soften. You sigh. The room around you remains still, the air just cool enough to hug the outline of your shape. There's no candle anymore, but the memory of its glow hovers behind your eyelids. Like the afterimage of a prayer. Like the smile of a friend after they've left the room. You remember now, monks rarely slept in long, luxurious stretches. Most followed a schedule broken by vigils, prayers, and the natural sounds of an old building refusing to be silent. One such account, written by an abbot named Reginald, speaks of a night so quiet, so gently rhythmic, that even the mice seemed to walk in time with the psalms. You suspect he was exaggerating, but only just. Monasteries had a way of bending perception, of making you think the walls themselves breathed in verse. And that's the feeling now. Breath. Stillness. Time curled around itself like a cat on a stone floor. There's more to say, probably. About sand timers. About the hourglass-shaped towers in Italian cities that told time with shadows. About the Spanish practice of marking midnight with a single bell and a muttered toast to St. Augustine. But maybe not now. Maybe those can wait. The wax has melted. The bells have rung. And all you need now is to let that final drop of thought fall into place, like a pebble sinking through still water. The sky outside your window is more ink than ash now, thick and blank and perfectly still. You lie there, softer than you were a moment ago, wrapped in the weight of stories and wax and cloistered bells. And one last image begins to flicker behind your eyelids, the monks again. Not as bustling scholars or earnest timekeepers, but as shadows moving through candlelit stone corridors, each carrying his own quiet task. No one rushes. No one speaks. There's a reverence in their pace, and maybe just a bit of weariness too. After all, even devotion gets tired. You picture the candle clocks now sitting in alcoves beside narrow wooden beds. Each candle carved carefully, hour by hour, notch by notch. The wax drips slowly. The wicks whisper. And across the room, a single metal ball, a tiny alarm weight, teeters on the edge of a melted groove, ready to fall and ping the start of matins. But even when it falls, no one startles. No one leaps from bed. These monks know the world isn't ending just because an hour has passed. It's simply beginning again. That's what makes them different. Their whole life is an exercise in waking slowly. In noticing. In understanding that sleep and prayer are just two sides of the same hush. And yet, for all their calm, they were surprisingly inventive. You wouldn't think it at first glance. Cloaks and sandals and zero interest in parties. But monastic orders in the Middle Ages were often centers of surprising tech. From crop rotation to brewing techniques to musical notation, monks were surprisingly industrious, albeit with the enthusiasm level of a man solving a puzzle with cheese and Gregorian chant. And yes, they invented alarm clocks. Or at least, the closest medieval Europe came to one before the mechanical gears of later centuries. But here's the twist. They weren't trying to help the world wake up. They were trying to help themselves not oversleep their vows. Because sleeping through prayer? That was frowned upon. And if your job was literally to chant into the darkness so God wouldn't feel lonely, well, you needed to be on time. Hence, the candle clock. Clever. Quiet. Mildly flammable. Historians still argue whether this kind of clock was widely used or just a monastic niche. Some say it was mostly symbolic, a tool of spiritual discipline rather than daily utility. Others insist they were practical, even exported to wealthy nobles who appreciated the novelty. There's a charming theory, unconfirmed, but persistent, that one 13th century bishop in France had a candle clock installed in every room of his house, including the pantry. So I might never forget the hour of gratitude, he supposedly said. Which sounds sweet, until you realize he may have just been using it to track snack times. The truth is, medieval people had a different relationship with time. It wasn't something to slice into minutes or manage with stress. It flowed like the seasons, like wind or water. Bells marked it. Shadows mapped it. And yes, sometimes, a candle helped nudge it along. But no one was chasing time. They were keeping it company. And maybe that's the lesson worth taking tonight. You've spent the last few hours drifting through ancient abbeys and smoke-sweet dormitories, watching wax melt and bells chime and monks shuffle across stone floors with sleepy reverence. You've peered into tiny workshops where time was measured not by seconds, but by slowness. By breath. By attention. Maybe you started this night a little restless. Maybe the world outside was buzzing with deadlines and dings and calendar alerts. But in here, in this candlelit sliver of time, things have softened. You've traveled from early monastic chants to water clocks in Persia, from incense timekeepers to knockers with pea shooters. You've followed time's trail not through ticking watches but through quiet rituals and half-lit hallways. And now the candle burns low. Your limbs feel heavier. The monks, somewhere beyond the veil of story, have all gone back to bed. Their prayers complete. Their vows intact. They'll rise again when the next candle calls. But you don't have to get up. Not yet. Not for matins or lauds or anything at all. You get to rest. Fully, finally. So let the wax drip. Let the shadows stretch. Let the world turn without you for just a little while. You're exactly where you need to be.